been thinking a lot about religious education and what it means. RE is something that we often think about as being an offering for children, but I have a different view of it. I believe that religious education, like all education, is something that starts at birth and that we are learning about every single waking minute, and sometimes even in our dreams as our subconscious works things through. Perhaps because I have been a homeschooling parent for so long, I have come to see learning, religious or otherwise, as something that is inherent in our biology and in how we survive and evolve. Learning is not something that happens exclusively in a classroom or in a worship service. Learning happens as we experience the daily demands, joys, and challenges of life. Alvin Toffler, author of Future Shocks, said that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Learn, unlearn, relearn. That seems to sum up a lot of what I come to church for. When we think of children's RE, we tend to think of classrooms that meet separately during the worship service. When we think of adult RE, we often think of seminars, membership information meetings, such as UU 101, or spiritual enrichment groups. These things are all valuable pieces of our education. But I also agree with philosopher John Dewey, who tells us that education is a process of living and not a preparation for future living. Although I am a homeschooler and aspire to be an unschooler who approaches learning as process and not as preparation, I also get caught up in qualifying what we are learning, whether it's my own test scores or what level of math my 12-year-old is tackling. It's hard not to worry about those standardized test scores that we've been acculturated to recognize as a measuring stick of our ability and even our worth. But how do we measure our spiritual growth? How do we qualify how well we are living up to our values as people of faith? In The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins, one of the most recognizable faces of New Atheism, as well as a British ethologist and evolutionary biologist, has this to say: all appearances to the contrary, the only watchmaker in nature is the blind forces of physics, albeit deployed in a very special way. A true watchmaker has foresight. He designs his cog springs and plans their interconnections with a future purpose in his mind's eye. Natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process which Darwin discovered, and which we now know is the explanation for the existence and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind. If it can be said to play the role of watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker. I was intrigued by this paragraph, especially when I started thinking of the hierarchies of our lives and of our religious education. I realized that holding this tension between being true watchmakers and blind watchmakers is how we best educate and become educated. When I am my best self in approaching education, whether my own or others, and I truly believe that all education is religious education. The things that we learn through books and experience and living life, all of those things inform how we live out our values. And it struck me that having a plan is a good thing, but so is the process of natural evolution in learning. If I approach a sermon or facilitation of a spiritual enrichment group or a political science class or even mathematics without a sense of openness and wonder and awe, if I approach learning or teaching as purely a watchmaker, then the narrowness of my vision has the potential to limit my own or others' learning. If I let nature take its course on automatic pilot without any direction or frame of reference for my core religious and theological beliefs, then there is a risk of being led far astray of what sustains my spirit. There is a balance of creating sacred space, intentionally creating a space that allows for personal growth and exploration, and being gently nudged by the insights and experiences of others that allows for a truly meaningful education. As I explore religion in my own personal life and with my family, I keep in mind what Australian homeschooler Beverly Payne said: lifelong learners start their education at home. I also keep in mind what Reverend Karen Anderson said in a sermon several years ago: it's hardest to be spiritual with your own family. Think about that for a moment. It is hardest to be spiritual with your own family. It's true. As I've raised my children and read parenting books and worked with at-risk homeless teens, I have often heard the wisdom that kids act out at home because they feel safe after a day of measuring up. The metaphor can be extended to adults. If we go to work all day and have to behave in a certain way, this wisdom can give us permission to let it all hang out at home where it's safe. I have a certain level of tolerance for these acting out behaviors with my kids, my spouse, my friends, and even with myself, especially with myself, when I'm working from this conventional wisdom. But last week, my friend Dawn, who recently survived breast cancer and has had a lot of personal transformation during her treatment, she said, "I have no tolerance anymore for that treat your family like crap because it's safe. I think that's a cop-out even for preschoolers and toddlers." Why? Because you should be treating the people you love as well as or better than the people you just know. Sure, we see our flaws and no one is perfect, but darn it, I get pretty tired of my kids treating their friends better than me. I wouldn't let my husband come home and treat me like you know what. Dawn is well known for telling it like it is, and I love her for it. You should be treating the people you love as well as or better than the people you just know. That's some wisdom right there. Remember that Payne said that lifelong learners start their education at home. If we tolerate behavior at home from our family, from our friends, and most especially from ourselves that belie our values and religious beliefs, then what kind of learning are we starting with? If we, as teacher, act like clockmaker, controlling every aspect of learning, every cog and wheel, without room for spontaneous growth and evolution, what kind of learning are we starting from? But if we start out with a balanced approach that values experience and open-ended questions, if we start out with a premise of acting with and expecting respect and love from ourselves and our closest associates, if we start out with the idea that learning is a process and not a preparation, if we start out with the idea that we can learn, unlearn, and relearn, then that opens up the possibility of the world as our classroom of religious education, no matter our age or theology. When the world is our classroom and every lesson is fraught with the possibility of learning, unlearning, and relearning facts and experiences, not just as education, but as education that is religious. Wow. Just wow. To me, that is a revelation right there. I invite us to spend a day, an hour, a week thinking about how to make life religious, how to make religious education ever present in our lives, how to make it something for you and for me, for our community, and for our children. May it be so.